The lasagna was still warm when my brother-in-law slid a folder across the table and told me to sign it, because the house I'd paid for over the last 6 years was, in his words, really a family asset, and it's time it went to the people who actually planted roots here. I'm a labour and delivery nurse. I work nights. I'd come straight off a 14-hour shift, peeled off scrubs that smelled like antiseptic and somebody else's blood, and driven 40 minutes to a Sunday dinner I almost skipped because my feet hurt and I hadn't slept since Friday. I sat down at the table I'd refinished myself. In the dining room I'd painted a soft clay colour the spring my husband died, and I ate my mother-in-law's lasagna. And then a man I'd known for 9 years told me to give him my house. His name was Del. He was my late husband's older brother, and he had a way of saying cruel things in a reasonable tone, like he was just reading the weather to you. I want to back up because if I don't, you won't understand why I just sat there at first, why my hand stayed in my lap, why I didn't flip the table or throw the folder in his face the way I've imagined 100 times since. My husband Bram died 3 years ago. Pulmonary embolism out of nowhere, 34 years old. He went to take a nap on a Saturday afternoon and he didn't wake up. And I was the one who found him. And I am not going to talk about that part because some doors you keep shut. We'd been married 4 years. We had a daughter, Posy, who was 18 months old when her father died and is 4 now, and has his exact laugh, this delighted little machine gun sound that still knocks the wind out of me. When Bram and I got married, we couldn't afford much. We rented a duplex with a landlord who wouldn't fix the heat. But Bram's parents owned a house on Marish Lane, a 2-story craftsman in a town outside Columbus, and they offered it to us at what they called a family price. The deal, the way they explained it at the time, was simple. We would take over the mortgage. We would put the down payment together. We would handle the taxes, the insurance, the repairs, the everything, and in exchange the house would be ours. Bram's father, Wendell Sr., shook my husband's hand across this very table and said, "It's yours now, son. You earned it." What I didn't fully understand then, what I understand with crystalline surgical clarity now, is that nobody ever changed the deed. The mortgage was refinanced into Bram's name and mine. We made every single payment. After Bram died, I made every single payment alone, on a nurse's salary, with a toddler, while also paying for daycare and a life insurance shortfall and the 1,000 small bleedings of widowhood. But the deed, the actual title to the property, still had Wendell Sr.'s name on it, because the family price had never come with a closing, never come with paperwork transferring ownership. It had come with a handshake. A handshake is not a legal instrument. I would learn that. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So there I was, Sunday, exhausted, with a fork in my hand, and Dell sliding the folder toward me. Across the table sat my mother-in-law, Coraline, dabbing her mouth with a napkin and not meeting my eyes. Beside her sat Dell's wife, my sister-in-law, a woman named Breezer, who I genuinely thought was my friend, who'd come to Bram's funeral and held my hand and cried real tears, or what I'd believed were real tears. "Sign it," Dell said again, gently, like he was coaxing Posy to eat her vegetables. "It just transfers the property back into the family trust. Mom's getting older. We need to consolidate the estate. It's cleaner this way." I looked down at the folder. I didn't open it. "Cleaner," I repeated. "You and Posy can stay, of course." Breezer jumped in, too fast, the way people do when they've rehearsed. "Nobody's putting you out on the street. You'd just be renting, essentially. A fair rent. We'd work it out." And there it was. They wanted me to pay rent. On the house I'd been paying the mortgage on for 6 years. They wanted to take the asset I'd bled for and then bill me to keep living inside my own grief. I should tell you what I did right then, because the people who watch these things always want to know why someone doesn't fight. So here is the truth. I did not fight. Not in that moment. I have replayed it, and I'm not ashamed anymore. But I'll be honest with you about the shape of it. I was so tired. Not just sleepy tired. The kind of tired that lives in your marrow when you've been a widow and a single mother and a night shift nurse all at once for 3 years. When Dell pushed that folder at me, some animal part of my brain just wanted the conflict to stop. I wanted to go home and sleep, and the cruelest trick they played wasn't even the folder. It was timing it for the exact moment I had nothing left. "I'm not signing anything tonight," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "I've been awake for 30 hours. I'm not making decisions like this at a dinner table." Dell's jaw did a small tightening thing I'd seen on Bram when he was angry. "It's not a decision, Renna. It's a formality. That's my name, Renna. Then it'll keep until I've slept," I said, and I stood up, and I went and got Posy from where she was colouring in the den, and I drove us home. Except here's the thing that started shifting that night, the first hairline crack in the version of myself that just absorbed punishment. On the drive home, with Posy asleep in her car seat and the highway empty, I thought about my father. My dad was a contractor for 30 years before his knees gave out. And one thing he told me, over and over, when I was a kid watching him deal with people who tried to stiff him on jobs, was this: Rennie, never sign anything tired, never sign anything sad, and never, ever believe a person who tells you something is just a formality. Formalities don't need your signature. I didn't sleep when I got home. I put Posy in her crib and I sat at my kitchen table, my kitchen, and I opened my laptop and I started reading. I want to be clear about something, because the people who tell these stories often make the heroine into either a saint or an idiot, and I was neither. I was a tired woman who got methodical. I did not call the police that night, because no crime had been committed yet. A man asking you to sign a folder is not a crime, it's an insult. I did not hire a lawyer at midnight, because that's not how lawyers work. What I did was pull up the county auditor's website, which in Ohio is public and free, and I searched the property address on Marish Lane. And there it was. Owner of record, Wendell Sr.'s last name, my father-in-law, who had been dead for 2 years. That's the part Dell hadn't counted on me knowing. Wendell Sr. had died 18 months after Bram, 2 deaths inside 3 years. That family had been gutted. And when Wendell Sr. died, the deed to the house, still in his name, didn't just evaporate, it became part of his estate. And I knew, because I'd sat in the lawyer's office during the reading of his will, holding Posy on my lap while everyone pretended I belonged there, that Wendell Sr. had left specific bequests. I didn't remember the details. I'd been a fog of grief and a colicky baby that whole year, but I remembered there had been a will, and a will meant probate, and probate meant a record. The next morning, I called in a favour that changed everything, not a dramatic favour. The kind real life is actually made of. My friend Tobias from nursing school had left bedside work and gone to law school, and was now a probate and estates attorney downtown. We'd kept in touch the way you do, birthday texts and the occasional coffee. I called him at 8 a.m, still in yesterday's clothes, and I said, "Toby, I need 20 minutes and I'll pay your rate. And I need you to tell me if I'm crazy." He gave me the 20 minutes for free. He told me to email him the parcel number and the decedent's name and whatever I had from the estate. And then I did the thing my exhaustion had almost talked me out of. I drove to the storage unit where I'd shoved 3 years of paperwork I couldn't bear to look at. Bram's death certificate, the funeral invoices, the boxes from when Wendell Sr. died, and Coraline had handed me Bram's things with shaking hands. I dug through it in a metal unit that smelled like dust and old cardboard, with Posy at daycare, and my phone propped up so Toby could see what I was finding, and I found the will, a copy of it, the one the executor had distributed. I sat on the cold concrete floor of that storage unit and I read it 3 times, and then I called Toby back and I could barely talk. Wendell Sr.'s will left the residence at Marish Lane, together with all my equity and interest therein, and I'm going to read it the way it was written, because it's burned into me, my son Bram, and in the event he should predecease me, to his lawful issue. His lawful issue. That's Posy. That's my daughter. Bram had predeceased his father by 18 months. So the moment Wendell Sr. died, that house, by the plain language of his own will, passed to my 4-year-old daughter. Not to the family trust, not to Dell, not to Coraline, to Posy, with me as her natural guardian and the person legally able to manage that asset until she's grown. I'd been paying the mortgage on a house my own daughter inherited, while my brother-in-law tried to bully me into signing it away to him. Toby was quiet on the phone for a second. Then he said, very carefully, like a doctor delivering a diagnosis, "Renna, did the estate ever get probated? Did anyone ever actually execute this will?" And that was the whole game right there. Because the answer was no. Here's what I pieced together over the next 2 weeks, with Toby pulling records and me making calls during my break room dinners at the hospital. When Wendell Sr. died, Dell had been named executor, and Dell had done nothing. He hadn't filed the will with the probate court. He hadn't distributed the assets. He hadn't transferred the deed. For 2 years, that estate had just sat there frozen, with the deed still in a dead man's name. I think, and Toby thought so too, that Dell left it deliberately unsettled. Because as long as the house legally belonged to the estate of Wendell Sr., and as long as nobody filed the will that would have handed it to a 4-year-old, Dell could keep pretending the house was up for grabs. He could keep telling himself and his mother that it was family property that ought to be consolidated. He was banking on me being too grief-stupid and too tired to ever read the actual document. He'd been the executor. He'd seen the will. He knew exactly what it said. He knew the house belonged to my daughter, and he tried to make me sign it away anyway. I want to tell you I felt triumphant when I understood all this. I didn't, not yet. What I felt, sitting in the hospital parking garage at 3 a.m. on a break, was a cold, clean kind of rage. The kind that doesn't shout. The kind that makes lists. Because in those same 2 weeks, while I was quietly building my case, Dell wasn't sitting still either. And this is where it got ugly. I started getting texts from Coraline. Long ones, the kind that start with, "I love you and I always will," and then spend 4 paragraphs explaining why I owed the family the house. Brisa called me selfish on a voicemail and said I was using Posey as a shield. Del sent one email, I think his only mistake of pure arrogance, that said the family had decided I would sign the transfer by the end of the month, and that if I didn't, they would pursue the matter, and that I should think about what's best for Posey, which is the kind of sentence that makes a mother see white at the edges of her vision. Then they escalated in a way I didn't expect. I came home from a shift to find a man taking photographs of my house from the sidewalk. When I asked him what he was doing, he said he was an appraiser hired by the property owner to assess the home for sale. For sale. They were trying to list my daughter's house. They'd found a realtor, a slick guy who, it turned out later, was Breeze's cousin, and they were moving to put the Marish Lane house on the market, based on Dell's claim that it was an unsettled estate asset he, as executor, controlled. That was the night I stopped being patient. But I want you to notice what stopping being patient actually looked like, because it's not what these stories usually show. I didn't drive to Coraline's and scream. I didn't post anything online. I didn't even cry, although I wanted to. What I did was call Toby and say one sentence, "They're trying to sell it. What do we file and how fast?" Fast, it turned out, was very fast because the law was so completely on my side that it was almost embarrassing. Here is what we did, in order, and I'm telling you the boring real version, because the boring real version is the one that actually works. First, Toby filed the will with the probate court. The will Dell had been sitting on for 2 years. The moment that document was on the public record, the question of who owned the house was no longer a family dinner table negotiation. It was a matter of court record, and the answer was Posey. Second, we filed a petition to remove Dell as executor for breach of his fiduciary duty, for sitting on the estate for 2 years, and far worse, for attempting to sell an asset that the will plainly directed to a minor heir, for his own benefit. Toby explained to me that an executor trying to transfer estate property to himself, against the terms of the will, isn't just a family squabble. It's self-deal. It's the kind of thing that gets you removed and can get you sued personally. Third, and this is the one that I felt in my chest, we filed to have me appointed as the administrator, and to have the deed transferred into a guardianship arrangement for Posey, with the mortgage I'd been paying credited and documented. Because here's a detail that mattered enormously. I had every mortgage payment, 6 years of them. Bank records, auto-pay confirmations, the refinance documents with Bram's name and mine. I could prove, down to the penny, that I had carried this house. Whatever murky idea Dell had that the family had been subsidizing me, the paper said the exact opposite. I had paid for everything while the deed sat fossilized in a dead man's name. The day we filed, I sent Dell exactly one message. I'd thought about it for a long time. I could have written paragraphs. I wrote 4 words. Check the probate docket. He called me 11 minutes later. I let it go to voicemail. I was, in point of fact, at the playground pushing Posey on a swing, and I was not going to take a call from that man while my daughter laughed in the sun. The voicemail he left was a study in a man realizing the floor is gone. It started angry. "Renner, what the hell did you file?" And you could actually hear, in real time, the moment he must have pulled up the record, because his voice changed. It got careful. It got quiet. It started using my full name in that reasonable tone again, the weather reading tone, except now the weather was a hurricane he'd built himself. I didn't call back. Toby handled it after that, the way you let your attorney handle it, which is one of the great pleasures available to a person who has finally gotten organized. What happened over the following months wasn't a movie. Probate is slow, but the direction was never once in doubt. The court found that Dell had breached his duty as executor. He was removed. The attempted listing was killed before it ever went live, and the will was enforced exactly as written. The Marish Lane house passed to Posey, held in a guardianship account with me as her guardian, free and clear, with every dollar of mortgage I'd paid documented as my contribution to her estate. The judge, a tired-looking woman about my mother's age, looked over her glasses at the record of Dell sitting on the will for 2 years while attempting to sell a child's inheritance, and the dryness in her voice when she addressed his new attorney was something I will treasure until I die. Coraline did not come to court. She sent me one more text near the end. It said only, "I hope you're happy." I looked at it for a long time. Then I wrote back, "I hope you're honest with yourself about what you all tried to do to a 4-year-old. She never replied. I don't expect she ever will, and I've made my peace with the size of that loss, because it is a loss. I lost a whole family that day, the family I'd married into and loved. People don't talk about that part. When you win against people who were supposed to love you, the prize is that you no longer have them. That's a strange, heavy kind of victory, and I won't pretend it tasted only sweet. Breezer, the sister-in-law who held my hand at the funeral, blocked my number. I think she was embarrassed. I think she'd convinced herself it was about consolidating an estate and not about taking a house from a widow, and when the court called it what it was, she couldn't sit in the same room as the truth. Her realtor cousin, I heard later, caught his own professional trouble for taking the listing without verifying who owned the property. I did not lift a finger to cause that. Some things just roll downhill once you stop holding them up. Here's what I have now, 2 years on. I still live in the house on Marish Lane. Posy is 6. She still has her father's laugh. The clay-coloured dining room is where she does her homework, at the table where her uncle once told me to sign away her home. I kept the table. I think about that some nights. I think it matters that she does her spelling words at the same table, in a house that is provably, legally, permanently hers. There's a kind of justice in furniture. I went back to school, part-time, online, between night shifts. I'm finishing a degree to become a nurse practitioner. Toby and I still get coffee. He never let me pay his full rate, and I have stopped arguing about it. And instead I made him godfather, which is its own kind of bill that never comes due. People ask me sometimes, the few people I've told, whether I have regrets, whether I wish I'd handled it differently. And here is the only thing I've figured out worth passing on. I don't regret being tired at that dinner table. I don't regret not flipping it over. The not flipping is what saved me, because a flipped table is a feeling, and a filed document is a fact, and facts are what hold a house. I regret only the years I spent believing that being good and quiet and grateful would protect me. It didn't. What protected me was a public records website, a friend who answered his phone, 6 years of receipts, and the plain, patient enforcement of a dead man's actual wishes, which were never, not for 1 second, the wishes Dell pretended they were. The handshake was never real, but the will was. And it turned out the dead can keep a promise the living try to break. Posy doesn't know any of it yet. Someday when she's grown, I'll tell her the whole thing, in that dining room at that table. I'll tell her that her grandfather wanted her to have this house, and that some people tried to take it, and that her mother, tired, sad, scared, and absolutely done being underestimated, read the documents, made the calls, and kept it. And I'll tell her the part that matters most. The part my own father told me on a dark highway with her asleep in the back seat. You don't have to be the loudest person in the room. You just have to be the one who read what everybody else assumed you never would.